I think a lot of men didn't stop feeling emotions. They just learned how to hide them. There's a difference there. Because most little boys start out emotional. They cry when they get hurt. They cry when they're scared. They cry when something breaks their heart. But somewhere along the way, many boys get taught the same lesson. That's enough. Stop crying. Man up. Shake it off. You're okay. And maybe nobody meant harm by it. Maybe the men saying those things were repeating what they had learned themselves. But eventually something happens inside of the boy when he hears it enough times. He learns that emotions are unacceptable, at least certain ones. So instead of processing the emotions, he suppresses them. And eventually, he becomes a man who doesn't know what to do with feelings except bury them. I think there are a lot of men living like that right now. And honestly, I think I could say I'm one of them. I think there's women, though, that carry emotional pressure too, just in different ways. So tonight, I want to talk about emotions. What happens when we suppress them? Why so many people are afraid of them? And why God never asked us to stop being human. Welcome to Unmasked, where we take off the filters and get real about faith, failure, and finding freedom. I'm your host, Wesley Farnsworth, a dad, veteran, author, and a man who's learned that God does his best work in the middle of our mess. Each episode, we have honest conversations with people who have walked through addiction, pain, doubt, loss, and redemption, and with pastors, leaders, and everyday people who are learning what it means to live authentically and follow God through real life. If these conversations encourage you, challenge you, or help you feel less alone, please make sure that you subscribe, follow, and share the podcast with someone else. That simple step really does help Unmasked reach more people who need hope. Now take a breath, pull up a chair, and let's get real. This is Unmasked. See, I can remember moments growing up where I cried. I cried at funerals or when I got hurt, and hearing other boys or later other men say things like, "That's enough." And it's interesting just how quickly that can change you. Because as a kid, you don't analyze it deeply. You just learn, okay, this is unacceptable. This makes people uncomfortable. This needs to stop. And so you stop externally, even though internally the emotion is still there. That's the part that most people miss. Suppressing the emotion does not erase the emotion. It just teaches people how to hide it. And after enough years of doing that, you become disconnected from yourself. Not because you don't feel deeply, but because you stopped allowing yourself to acknowledge what you were feeling. I think many men are emotionally conditioned long before they're emotionally mature enough to understand what's happening. Boys are often rewarded for composure, not honesty, for toughness, not tenderness, for appearing unaffected, not for processing pain in healthy ways. And again, most people teaching this aren't trying to destroy boys emotionally. They're normally just passing down survival skills. Because many older men were never taught emotional health either. They were taught endurance, functionality, stoicism. So they repeat what they learned. And generation after generation, men become emotionally armored, not emotionally healthy. The problem is, though, that buried emotions don't disappear, and instead they begin to leak. They leak into anger, isolation, addiction, shame, emotional numbness. A lot of men who, quote unquote, never cry still feel deeply. The emotion just comes out sideways. I think some men genuinely don't realize how much pain they carry because they've learned how to suppress it so early. Instead of saying, I'm hurt, it becomes, I'm irritated, or withdrawn, or emotionally unavailable, or constantly distracted. And after a while, people stop recognizing the original wound underneath the behavior. And sometimes the man himself forget it's there. But I also think women experience emotional pressure too, just differently. See, I think that women are often allowed to feel emotion, but not always honestly. Women can have pressure in this area too. I believe that women feel like they have to keep everybody happy. They have to stay composed, to be emotionally nurturing, to avoid being too much. So women suppress emotion too, not because they were told not to cry, but because they learned that certain emotions threatened connection. Anger, disappointment, exhaustion, these are all things that they think can threaten connection. So they became caretakers emotionally, managing everybody else's feelings while quietly ignoring their own. Different pressure, same result, disconnection. I think one of the saddest things that happens to people, though, is when normal human emotions starts feeling shameful. Tears become weakness, fear becomes failure, sadness becomes something to hide. Eventually, people stop treating emotion like information and start treating it like danger. And that creates emotionally fragmented people. People who don't know how to sit with grief, process disappointment, express hurt honestly, or even recognize what they're feeling. And honestly, that creates loneliness too, because intimacy requires emotional honesty. Going back to the men here, I think a lot of men are exhausted from trying to appear unshaken all the time. They feel like they always have to be composed, strong, fine. And underneath it, there's grief, fear, pressure, loneliness. But they don't know how to let it out anymore. And they're afraid that if they start, they won't know how to stop. I've heard men say things like, if I open that door, I don't know that I can close it. Everything might come out. And honestly, I can understand that fear because suppressed emotion builds pressure internally. One of the things that I love about Jesus is how emotionally honest he was. Throughout Scripture, we see that he wept, he grieved, he felt compassion, anguish, sorrow. Even in the garden before the cross, you can see emotional honesty. And that matters because sometimes Christians accidentally treat emotional suppression like spiritual maturity. But Scripture doesn't teach that. Jesus was not emotionally numb, he was emotionally whole. And that's different. Emotions matter, and emotions are not weakness. They're indicators. They reveal things. They reveal things like pain, love, loss, fear, joy. Ignoring emotions doesn't make you stronger. It usually makes you less aware. An unprocessed emotion eventually shapes behavior, whether you acknowledge it or not. That's why emotional health matters spiritually too. Because disconnected people often struggle to connect deeply with others, and sometimes even God. I think healing often starts when people give themselves permission to feel again. Not recklessly, but honestly. They give themselves permission to cry, to grieve, to acknowledge pain without immediately apologizing for it. And that can feel incredibly uncomfortable at first, especially for men. I know I have been there. Because vulnerability feels very unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things often feel unsafe. But emotional honesty is not weakness, it's courage. I think many people, though, avoid emotions because they associate the emotion with chaos. If I cry, I'll fall apart. If I talk about it, I'll lose control. And so instead of facing the chaos that they fear, they just stay emotionally contained. But emotional suppression is not peace. It's simply management. And eventually management gets exhausting because you're continually and constantly monitoring yourself. You're filtering yourself. You're containing yourself. And that gets heavy. Now, I want you to hear this because I'm going to say something important, I think. See, feeling emotion doesn't mean that emotions should control your life. There is a difference between healthy personal expression and emotional impulsiveness. This isn't about exploding on people or making every feeling ultimate truth. It's about honesty, awareness, wholeness, being emotionally honest enough to acknowledge what's real instead of burying it alive. I think safe people matter deeply here too, because many people need environments where emotions are not mocked, minimized, or rushed. Places where tears are not embarrassing, where grief is not inconvenient, where honesty isn't treated like weakness. And honestly, that's part of what healthy Christian communities should be. Not performance, not emotional shutdown, but real humanity, real support, real presence. I've talked about community time and time again on this podcast. If you haven't already listened to it, I encourage you to go back and listen to the community mini series that I did recently. I think things start to shift, though, when people stop asking, how do I stop feeling this? And instead they start asking, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Those are two different things, because emotions are often invitations to grieve, heal, slow down, process, pay attention. And maybe God isn't asking you to stop feeling. Maybe He's inviting you to stop hiding. Some of you listening learned to shut off emotions very young. I know I did. You don't even realize how disconnected you've become. I know I didn't. And honestly, I don't say it with judgment. I say it with compassion because I've been there. Because many people learned suppression before they learned emotional safety. But God did not create you to live emotionally numb. He created you to live whole. So here's your action step this week. The next time you feel strong emotion, don't rush to suppress it immediately. Pause and ask yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? And not the surface answer, but the honest one. And then sit with it for a few moments without judging yourself for having emotions in the first place. Because healing often begins when we stop shutting ourselves down long enough to finally listen. And if you have kids, encourage them to sit in their emotions and maybe try and help them to figure out exactly what they're feeling. And men especially, let's not be so quick to turn off our children's emotions. Thanks for joining me today on Unmasked. If something in this episode spoke to you, don't let it stop with you. Share it with the one person that God put on your heart while you were listening. You never know whose breakthrough might start with just a simple conversation or a shared episode. If you've been encouraged by Unmasked, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share a podcast on social media. Every share helps these stories reach people who are struggling silently and looking for hope. For more encouragement, information on me and my speaking, books, and free resources. For more encouragement, information on me and my speaking, books, and free resources, visit wesleyfarnsworth.com. And make sure you join the Unmasked community by connecting with me on social media so that we can keep walking this journey together. Until next time, remember that grace is greater than your past, and real freedom, true freedom, begins the moment that you choose to live unmasked. God bless you.